News.
Well, with me now is architect Robert Baca, who's been involved in designing some radical solutions to stop houses being flooded. Robert, welcome. Thank you very much for coming in.
Hello, Julian.
And are we now talking about a situation where we do have to design ourselves out of this problem, do you think?
I think what it's showing is there's definitely a need for more innovative and sort of creative responses. I mean, the thing is that I guess historically we sort of said, well, let's try and stop flooding from occurring. But the reality is that we're not going to stop it. We've got to actually learn to work with water and to learn with the sort of natural cycles that occur. And so what we have been sort of exploring over the last few years and actually starting to implement and build is a number of different measures that do work with water.
Okay, well, let's talk about the one on the desk. First of all, describe a little bit here as to what we have and the significance of it in terms of the design elements, which would mean that flooding was far less likely.
Well, firstly, what I should say is this is in a very unique situation in the sense that it's a house that's very close to the river along the Thames in Marlow, and there's a very high level of flood risk here. It's an island, and therefore the sort of solution we needed to find here had to be kind of quite radical if it was to actually adapt to climate change. So what we have developed is it's a replacement for an existing house there at the moment, which isn't very good at sort of responding to flooding. And the idea is actually, and the design is that it's a house that will sit within the ground, but it's completely independent apart from these 4 guideposts, and the whole house will actually float up, buoyed by the water.
Which we're now seeing on film as you do it here in the studio as well. So, go on, yes.
And then it will gradually settle back down again when the floodwater rescinds. So if there's a metre of floodwater, it rises with a metre. If it's a metre and a half, it rises with that. So it means it's always adaptable to whatever the flood risk might be.
I mean, in design terms, that is extraordinary. I'm thinking it must be rather expensive.
Well, it's certainly not as cheap measure, but of course, then if you're faced with a site which could flood to up to almost 2 metres of floodwater,
sure,
then of course you need to be quite radical. But the interesting thing is that it's a house which has effectively got a basement. It's a conventional house on the top of it. It's a timber frame construction, so it's not that much more expensive than a house that you would have with a basement. In fact, the most challenging thing on this side is the fact that we can't actually get to it other than by river or by land, which is much more challenging than the fact that it's amphibious.
What about some of the other things that you're looking at here?
Well, some of the other schemes that we're putting forward are much more about making space for water in development. So, as I said about working with water, what we're trying to do is to actually reduce flood risk, not just for sites that we're looking at, but for areas upstream and downstream, so the surrounding properties. So when we're trying to actually look at a development, we're saying, what can you do to actually try and reduce the flood risk for other people? So we're creating things like you saw in Sheffield, the sort of parkland spaces, car park areas that can store water, and the below ground ones that people are saying can't be done. Well, we're doing those. And all of these things start to store water to actually reduce the flood risk for other people.
Right, so as we look again at the films here, the water is building up in various places, and that's what you're referring to when you say store water.
So this is actually very much more about kind of retrofitting. So for the people who've very sadly been affected by flood risk in the recent days, what this is smart technology. So instead of putting sandbags out and things which are reliant on people actually being there to actually do that, it's technologies which are almost like not so much fit and forget, but they're ones that will actually operate automatically, and so where you can protect your home without you having to be there. And these are obviously really important for people where there's a lot of existing houses already at risk at the moment. And this will be a showcase, will be at the Building Research Establishment in Watford, so people can actually go and see it, and it will be artificially flooded, so you can see these things automatically rising, flooding up against kind of windows and stuff without it affecting people.
And how receptive are those who need to be receptive to ideas like this?
Well, obviously it's important that we have national planning policy which establishes some very good principles about not building on floodplain and about trying to find measures which are safe and where people are protected. But there is room for always more innovation, and one of the things we're really keen on is something we'll be calling like an innovation license, where you might have an area that could be set aside away from planning regulations, where people could actually explore new ideas, and they could develop these, build these, and if they're proven to work, then they could keep their license and they could be retained.
Okay.
And it's a little bit like the initiative that people are doing in America to actually deliver some of the space age technologies.
Good to have you with us, Robert. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you very much, Julian.